This is Empowered by Iron podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Kristin Lander, a chiropractic physician, a sports nutritionist, and an elite powerlifter.
And I'm Mary Morton, PhD scientist, sports nutritionist, and weightlifter. This podcast is designed to cut through all the BS out there and teach you what you need to know to excel as a woman in strength sports.
Our topics include mindset and evidence-based training, nutrition, and recovery. No bro science, just facts with a hefty dose of practicality, reality, and some feels mixed in. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Empowered by Iron. Before we jump into today's episode, we want to just jump into a hot topic in the news right now. Coronavirus. I'm sure a lot of you guys are sick of hearing about it, but Mary and I are really good at digesting scientific information and putting it into layman's terms. So we wanted to just do our part to put things into simple terms for everyone to understand. Mm-hmm. So there is no cause for panic with coronavirus.
I'm not panicking.
We're not panicking.
I'm panicking.
But also it's not just the flu.
It is not just the flu.
It is more serious than the flu.
Well, it's more serious because we don't know much about it. We don't know a whole lot about it. And as scientists, that's very scary because we know how the flu works. We know there's going to be different strains. We know people are going to get sick. We don't know how this one works. And I think it's really important for us to point out that this is no longer about us. Kristin and I aren't necessarily worried about us getting sick. I'm not worried about most of you getting sick. We need
to like if you do get sick, it will probably be mild to moderate and you'll recover.
It'll be fine. But the problem is we are putting at jeopardy our other populations, right? The elderly
or anyone immunocompromised. I mean, anyone with diabetes, anyone with an autoimmune condition who's on immunosuppressants. There's a whole list of anyone with asthma or any respiratory conditions. There's a whole lot of people that if we are careless, we can infect. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, the mortality rate for those people is really high. It's 10 times higher than that of the flu. So that's the scary part. And also what is alarming to me is that it takes anywhere from 2 to 14 days for your symptoms to show after you've been infected. So in that period of time, you're contagious and you can potentially infect a lot of people in your community. So that's why we're starting to see the social distancing. That's why we're seeing a lot of universities take their classes online. That's why we're seeing a lot of people working from home. And it's not because those of us that are healthy need to be panicking. It's not about panic. It's about how we protect our communities and the most vulnerable people in our communities. And so I think we all have a responsibility to our communities to do our parts to limit the spread.
Yeah. This was brought on for us because we were planning to do a seminar in Austin at Liberation Barbell in May, and we were really excited about it. But just with how things are going, we thought it would be very irresponsible of us to put on an event like that. While this is a big concern, like I said, not because we're worried about getting sick, but because we're worried about what we could bring back to our communities or what gathering of people in Austin, what that could bring back to their community. So we just want you guys to be safe. We want you guys to remember that this, in a situation like this, it's not about you. It's about us. It's about the community. And the more that we think about this in terms of us as a community and fighting it as a community, the better protected, the most vulnerable of our population will be, including elderly and immunocompromised. So just be smart. Okay, guys, this is a great time for you to just hide in your little house.
Yeah, definitely. Like you can still go to the grocery store. You can still go to the drugstore. But you don't necessarily need to be going to huge gatherings.
Yeah, Netflix and chill it. I mean, I just watched Love is Blind, the trashiest TV I've ever watched. Loved it. Cheers, great. Like DM me for some recommendations on Netflix. I'm down. But I think this is a good time for us to just take a step back and think about our community. And also, what a great time it would be to focus on your nutrition.
Yeah, for sure. Right. What else do you have to do? No.
If you guys don't know, Kristin and I both have our nutrition coaching businesses. Kristin's is a macro-based performance nutrition coaching business. She has 2 other coaches working for her, Fiercely Fueled Nutrition. She's accepting clients now, which is awesome. She has been for a while. I don't know why I said it that way.
Well, I was kind of slowing down who I was accepting for a while because I was too busy and I didn't feel like I could do a good job. But now I've got 2 coaches that I have been training for a year up and running. So they are taking new clients. I'm still taking new clients, but they're helping with the load, which is awesome.
Yep, growing the business.
Yeah.
And I also have intuitive athlete nutrition. If macro tracking and any type of number-based nutrition it hasn't worked for you, if you have a history of disordered eating, that's who I work with. I work with athletes looking to learn how to intuitively eat as an athlete. So if you're interested in signing up for Kristin's nutrition coaching business, you can go to fiercelyfueled.com. If you're interested in signing up with Intuitive Athlete Nutrition, you can go to intuitiveathletenutrition.com. Both will be linked in the show notes. And without further ado, let's jump into today's episode.
Woohoo!
Hello, ladies. Welcome back to Empowered by Iron. This week we have a science-heavy episode for you all about soy. My name is Dr. Mary Morton. I have my PhD in biological sciences and I am a CISSN sports nutritionist. And here's my co-host.
Hey guys, I'm Dr. Kristin Lander. I am a doctor of chiropractic and also a CISSN sports nutritionist.
And together we are Empowered by Iron. Today, our topic is about soy, hormone health, and being a female, basically.
Yeah, we get lots and lots of people asking us about soy. And I think you particularly, because you're vegan, get so many questions about soy and like, is soy bad for you? Can you get strong consuming soy? Like tons of questions, right?
Tons and tons of questions. And I will say to start off this episode, like, unless the research said that soy was actually going to put toxins into my body and I would be dead tomorrow, I'm going to eat soy. Like I'm going to eat soy. I know it's not, as we'll get into, not the most optimal for strength. It's not the best for a lot of things. It's good for some other things. I'm going to eat it regardless of what the research says because that's just what I've built my life around. I'm vegan. It's a moral choice. It's not a health choice. I don't think that veganism should be a health diet. Personally, it's a moral choice. So regardless of what the research says, I'm still going to eat soy. But that being said, I will say it was really hard for me to do this research because I really wanted the research to be one way.
You are looking at it as a scientist, knowing that you have to be unbiased and you really wanted to let your personal biases enter in, right?
Oh, yeah, I did.
Hard. And
I started out, I was like, oh, I'm going to get this. I was like a fighter in a ring. I was like, I'm going to beat this. Then I was like, oh, okay, calm down. And I think that's really important to do as scientists, as doctors.
I had the exact same thing happen with our water cuts episode that we did. I really wanted it to show, I really wanted the research to show a certain way and it didn't. And that's part of being a scientist is like leaving those biases out. Like, could I have found only research that supported what my bias was? Probably. I probably could have done that. And we know that there's a lot of examples of that happening out in the real world.
Oh, yeah.
So this is a very unbiased, even though Mary's vegan and I am not.
Have the potential to be biased.
Yeah. But yeah, there's tons of conflicting information out there on soy. And I think a lot of people, healthcare professionals included, are just really uncertain about soy and its effects on health.
Absolutely. So what is soy? Let's start with that. We say soy. Well, what do we mean? We mean soy isolated from the soybean itself, and it's used to make a lot of different products, including soy milk and soy protein and tofu. And that's where soy comes from. It comes from a bean. So soy itself contains these things called isoflavones. And when you take in soy, when you eat soy, these isoflavones are converted into phytoestrogens in the body.
Which just means plant estrogens, basically.
Plant estrogens. You can think of them, I like to think of it, and we'll get this a little later, but think of them, sometimes they will fight estrogen. So they're phytoestrogens. There's different types, and we have a blog post on this on Female Strength Academy. I'll link that below, and that breaks down the different types. We're not going to talk about that here because that's a little deeper than what we wanted to talk about just on the podcast. So like I said, phytoestrogens, they fight estrogen, but they can also work with estrogen, and they're similar to an estrogen that is found within our bodies. And they also bind to the receptors in our body that are for estrogen. So if there's one receptor in our body that estrogen will bind, the phytoestrogens will come in and also bind that receptor. It will bind it a little weaker than regular estrogen, but it can still have the potential to interact with that receptor. Mm-hmm. And so what we're going to be presenting is research and information specific to women and women's health. We do mention a few things about dudes, but for the most part, it's women because Female Strength Academy.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, so let's talk about estrogen and estrogen receptors.
Yeah, so estrogen. We hear about it all the time, but what is it? It's the primary female sex hormone. We make estrogen in our body through different organs, including your adrenal glands. It's important for both reproductive and non-reproductive health. So it's good for helping with your heart. It protects against bone loss. Like estrogen is really important for other things other than ovulation. Like I said, it can be made in the liver, in the heart, in the bones, in your brain, in your muscles. But these specific estrogens that are made in these different tissues are only going to act on those tissues and likely won't be found what we call circulating estrogens, or estrogens that are moving throughout the body, kind of freely interacting with the entire body.
Right.
Yeah. So in premenopausal women, estrogens are made in the ovaries and adrenal glands, and this temporary hormone secreting organ formed after ovulation called the corpus luteum, and in the placenta during pregnancy. So estrogen, believe it or not, is primarily stored in fat cells / adipose tissue. So if you have a lot of fat tissue on your body, you're going to have a lot more estrogen storage than someone who is extremely lean. And you can imagine if someone who is extremely lean and they don't have a lot of fat stores, they don't have a lot of estrogen storage, which means that their hormones are going to be a little discombobulated.
Might be a little bit lower. Yeah. So the leaner you are, likely the lower your estrogen, though not necessarily.
But I mean, if we're going in theory here, that's one way to think about it. So there are three main forms of estrogen. The main form is estradiol, and estradiol is the most prominent form in premenopausal women. And then estriol, which is another form of estrogen, plays a major role after menopause. And then there's this other one called estron, and it's the least significant, but it tries really hard. So a lot of scientists agree that it's the ratio of these three different estrogens might be a better indicator of your overall hormonal health than just looking at estradiol or estron alone. So we need to look up the entire picture of your hormonal health in terms of estrogen by looking at these three together. It's like taking a book and you have 3 chapters, and if you just look at chapter 3, you don't know what chapter 1 and 2 said.
That's right. It's important to know. It really is important to know what all of them are doing. Yeah. And what's interesting is that the numbers decrease significantly after menopause. So estradiol levels is like 85 to 90% 85 to 90% lower than what they are in premenopausal women. Yeah. And estron is actually decreased too, though not quite as significantly. Yeah. But so we think about that happening at a certain age with menopause. But just bear in mind that the marker of menopause is a significantly decreased estrogen. So that can happen. You can be menopausal in your 30s if your hormones are really messed up.
This is why it's important to really have a handle on your hormonal health, especially if you feel things are not good with your body. It might be a good idea just to test that. Yep. So that's just the basics of estrogen. Now we also have in our bodies estrogen receptors. And these estrogen receptors are what actually interact with our circulating estrogens. And that's what's going to cause all these different things to happen in our body. So when estrogen is bound to an estrogen receptor, it can actually do one of two things. It can either enter the nucleus of the cell, so where your DNA is found, and it's going to actually change how your genes are used in your DNA depending on the cell. And that's going to change a lot of things, right? You're literally changing the DNA of your cell. And the other thing it can do is it can have effects outside of your DNA that just affect the functionality of the cell, but not necessarily the DNA. Now, I say that estrogen receptors can affect DNA, and that's not inherently a bad thing. I think it's really important to point that out. We hear that and we freak out because there's a lot of hype about, oh, it's going to affect your DNA. Well, most things in your body is going to affect your DNA.
Sometimes that's a good thing. So in the case for me, who I have a genetic mutation that puts me at a very, very high risk for cancer, something affecting my DNA possibly in a positive way is really good. I would look for something to do that because of the genetic mutation. So sometimes you want to, it just depends on what you're trying to express or what you're trying to like hinder, I guess, or dampen in your DNA.
Yeah, and keep in mind, it's not just estrogen that does this. It's a wide variety of molecules, a wide variety of receptors. Your body is constantly changing its DNA all the time. So it's not bad, it's not good, it just is.
It's a fact.
It's a fact. So there are two different types of receptors. You might be thinking, geez, this is getting really science heavy. And so just bear with us just a few more moments here. There are two receptor types. There is one called estrogen receptor alpha, which we will just call alpha. And then there's estrogen receptor beta, which we'll just call beta. Alpha is made in many different organs, but of note, the uterus, the bones, breast tissue, liver, kidneys, and cells in the ovary, and even specific areas of the brain are where this specific estrogen receptor is found. Now, beta is found in your colon, in your bone marrow, in blood vessels, in your lungs, bladder, and your brain, and different cells of the ovary than alpha.
So tell them why this is important, Mary.
This is important. I know that got really heavy, really science heavy. Trust me, when I found that out, I was like, oh, well, that's weird.
By the way, learning all of that or researching all that sent us into a serious research spiral, which we'll get into in a little bit. But we went full nerd for like a good little while.
Yeah. So in terms of phytoestrogens and estrogen receptor, phytoestrogens actually primarily bind the beta version of this estrogen receptor. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't bind the alpha version, but if the two are present in the same cell, they're more likely going to bind the beta because they just have a higher attraction, basically, to the beta than the alpha. But keep in mind that not all bonds are created equal. So just because a phytoestrogen has bound this estrogen receptor, that doesn't mean it's going to have the same effects as estrogen binding to that receptor. So if you think of when estrogen binds a receptor, that receptor now is acting at 100-fold. It's gone from 0 to 100 real quick. But if a phytoestrogen binds, that receptor is going to go from 0 to maybe 50 or 0 to maybe 80, just depending on the receptor and the tissue and whatever. So it's not going to have the full same effect, but it's going to have an effect.
Yep.
It's definitely
a weaker effect than estrogen.
A weaker effect, but an effect.
And sometimes that's good, and sometimes that's not good.
So it can have an anti-estrogenic effect, meaning it's fighting estrogen, or it's going to have a pro-estrogenic effect, meaning it's just going to amplify.
It's going to amplify estrogen.
It's going to amplify estrogen. Now, this is really important in terms of cardiovascular and bone health. So, as we get older, we lose estrogen and we run risks of having deterioration of our bones and our cardiovascular system. And
these are the primary concerns for women that are in menopause and postmenopausal is their cardiovascular and bone health.
Yep. So researchers have investigated the use of phytoestrogens as a therapeutic for bone loss and cardiovascular health. And what they found is that phytoestrogens actually have a cardioprotective, meaning they protect the heart and the cardiovascular system, and they also protect from bone loss. They found a higher concentration of beta in bone marrow and blood vessels. So estrogen is bone protective. So the weak binding of the estrogen receptors by phytoestrogens can actually have a slight protective effect. So it's just amplifying that protective effect of estrogen. Okay, that was a lot. Let's just sum that up. So you take in soy, and soy contains isoflavones. In your body, isoflavones are converted into phytoestrogens. And phytoestrogens can act like estrogen, meaning they can bind the estrogen-specific receptors in your body, and they can have either a pro-estrogenic effect, meaning they amplify the effects of estrogen, or they literally fight estrogen and they have an anti-estrogen effect. Whew. Okay.
That was a lot.
That was a lot. So
the one thing that I think that comes up a lot, especially in my world, because I live in a world of high risk cancer, right?
Yes.
Like I am in support groups with cancer survivors. I have family members and friends that have had cancer. I myself am at a very, very high risk for cancer. And so one of the things that circulates throughout this like cohort of people that I'm involved with is, does soy have any potential risk of putting you at an even higher risk of developing cancer? Does consuming soy do that? Or possibly, some people say, does soy actually decrease your risk of certain cancers? Mm-hmm. And so this part, I think, is just a question that comes up a lot. And I think it's important to know that research in high-risk populations is incredibly mixed. We really don't know. So if you are high risk for cancer and you're wondering about soy, I would urge you to talk to your doctor and follow your doctor's recommendations. They may or may not be as up on the research, but I think following doctor's orders is probably always best. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the research shows that phytoestrogens appear to reduce the risk of breast cancer.
In non-high-risk people.
In non-high-risk populations.
Yeah.
Yep. We don't know about high-risk populations. It's very mixed. But women who consume a high amount of soy consistently during adolescence and adulthood had a substantially reduced risk of breast cancer. And there was no significant association with soy food consumption found for postmenopausal breast cancer. Mm-hmm. So what they found, so they looked at this huge population of Asian countries and found that women who started consuming soy, if you don't know, Asian countries consume a lot of soy, and they start out eating soy earlier than we do in the U.S.
Yeah.
Like intentionally, right? Like most kids probably don't eat tofu. But in the U.S.
Yeah. And they don't have as high of a regular like red meat
exactly
consumption there that we do here.
Exactly. And so what they've found is that people that start consuming soy in adolescence or earlier have a certain strain of gut bacteria that helps with the digestion and the processing and assimilation of the soy.
Interesting.
So they're not sure, is that protective in and of itself of breast cancer? They're not really sure, but there's definitely a lot of research that shows us that people that consume soy throughout their lifetime have a decreased risk of breast cancer, at least in these populations of people.
And I wonder if that's just speaking off record here. This is not science backed. I wonder if that's because of what they don't have in their diet versus what they do. Like how parsing apart, is it because they don't have X in their diet?
Right.
Or is it because they have soy in their diet?
Right.
That's interesting. That'd be interesting to look at.
And that's one reason they looked at like, well, what's happening in their gut flora and were able to isolate this strain bacteria that we don't have.
That's
and they
crazy.
found that was likely developed because they started eating soy at a young age. So we're not entirely sure, but that we know that to be true, that they have a lower risk of premenopausal breast cancer. And then I think that it's kind of the same in terms of postmenopausal breast cancer.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. So that's basically what we found with cancer specifically. If you heard us talk about breast cancer in women, is that in lower risk populations, it seems to have a protective effect. But if you are higher risk, listen to your doctor. Talk to your doctor, listen to your doctor. Everything goes out the window if you have something like that. It's just, if it doesn't fit within what we consider normal, it's going to change how everything is affected.
Yep.
Yeah. As you know, I'm sure you know. So then the big question is, how does soy affect our menstrual health? How does it affect?
Or does it?
Yeah. Our hormonal menstrual health. So a lot of this information was taken from the Period Repair Manual. Dr. Laura Bryden, we highly suggest that you check out this book, especially if you're someone who's on birth control or who thinks there might be something wrong. If you haven't had a period in a while, or you think there's something wrong, this book is a great resource. She cites a lot of sources, very insightful. But in the book, she says that normal fluctuation of estrogen is high levels can be detected a few days before you ovulate. Levels of estrogen fall, but don't go to zero. They're not completely depleted after ovulation and during the formation of that temporary estrogen secreting organ called the corpus luteum. And then levels increase again right before you have your period, so right before you menstruate. Now, estrogen is a very important factor in period health, but also this other hormone called progesterone is as well. So if there is a molecule, as we're talking about here, phytoestrogens, that are present that competes with estrogen for the receptor or for that positive effect in your period health, it can lead to menstrual dysfunction, but only in high doses. So if you're eating a crap ton of soy, which we'll get into what a high dose means in a little bit, but if you're eating a lot of soy, you may be negatively impacting your menstrual health without even knowing it. However, in moderate to low doses, phytoestrogens can actually benefit your period health. It reduces some of the effects of estrogen and will actually let progesterone kind of do its thing and shine. And in terms of period health, we want more progesterone in our bodies. We want it. We love it, especially in terms of strength. It helps us build strength. And when we are on hormonal birth control, we actually lose progesterone. Our body no longer makes progesterone. So if you're on hormonal birth control, your progesterone production goes to zero. You don't get the magical, beautiful progesterone.
Right.
So in terms of your period health, it's also really important to know where your estrogen levels are and how soy consumption could affect them. So if you're someone like me, where I'm in my 20s, I likely have high levels of estrogen. I've never tested it, but I likely do. So having soy isn't going to really affect me, and I don't really think about it. But someone like Kristin,
someone like me who's pushing 40, and I know that I actually, because of my high risk of breast cancer, I was as soon as I found out I had that gene mutation, so I was 25 or 6 when I found that out. My doctor said, I want you to keep your estrogen levels as low as possible. And one of the ways we were going to do that is for me to stay as lean as possible. So the goal was for me to be as lean as I could be before I lost my period. That was the goal, to keep my estrogen levels in check, to keep them low. So I've kept them pretty much at a low level my whole life. And now I'm almost 40 and I'm like teetering on menopause. Like they're pretty low. They decreased obviously significantly after I had my bilateral mastectomy, because as we talked about, estrogen is stored in fat tissue, which breast tissue is
fat tissue.
Right. So they were depleted a little bit. So for me, I wouldn't want to, like, I don't want to go into full menopause yet. Like, I'm still a little young for that. So consuming a lot of soy would definitely not be something I want to do, because I don't want anything to be competing with that estrogen that I've
You're
got.
already low estrogen.
I'm already pretty low. Yep.
Yeah. So it just depends on where you are at. But if you're in general terms here, if you're just a general population woman, having moderate to low doses of soy or phytoestrogens it could be beneficial.
Right.
For your period health.
Right. So there's a lot of, I've just heard a lot of weird claims about soy in men, that like men are going to grow boobs if they eat soy, and saying that it's like really estrogenic for men.
I have to say this part of the research I was really happy about. My bias came out and I was like, oh, I knew it.
Yeah. So soy is not shown to have an estrogenic effect in men or an anti-androgenic effect. So it's not going to lower testosterone, and it's not going to raise estrogen. Remember, men do have some estrogen.
It's normal. Important for their hormonal health as well.
Right. But soy is not as effective in promoting anabolism as is whey protein. So, but it doesn't feminize men. So ladies, you don't need to be concerned if your guy's consuming soy protein. Yeah. We're going to get into in a minute. It just might not be, in terms of supplementation, it's probably not as good as whey protein is for them. But we'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah. So like, to put it in simple terms, if we think of soy and whey protein as being at a level 0 for this study, and if it went below a level 0, that means it was bad for you. But if it went above a level 0, it meant it promoted strength. The soy never went below 0, so it didn't have any negative effects, and neither did the whey. Right. But if we talk about going above 0, whey went to, let's say, 100, and soy maybe went to 70. So it still had an anabolic effect. It still promoted strength, but it did not promote strength in the way that whey protein did. But it didn't have a negative effect that we hear about it being feminizing.
Right. And when you talk about promoting strength, I think you specifically, woo, that was a hard word to say. Woo! You specifically mean muscle protein synthesis.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Yep.
So this is where we got really, really nerdy, because we found some really cool stuff about what muscle fibers are impacted by what protein. Mm-hmm. So we're going to get more into the whey versus soy protein thing in a minute, but this study was specifically done on men, so we wanted to talk about it while we're talking about men real quick. That we found. The research found that whey protein had more of an effect on increasing type 2 muscle fiber size than soy did, and soy had more of an effect of increasing type 1 muscle fiber size. So we're talking about like hypertrophy here of different types of muscle fibers, which is interesting because type 1 is better for, type 1 is more primarily endurance sports, right?
Yeah.
Like you use more type 1 fibers in endurance sports than you do type 2. Mm-hmm. And then type 2 is more strength power sports.
Yes.
So really, really interesting. So that potentially this may suggest that for endurance athletes, soy protein supplementation may outperform whey.
Yeah.
Potentially.
The opposite for strength.
Right.
Potentially. I mean, this was one study that they just kind of mentioned this as a caveat, but it was very interesting because they didn't just kind of increase it. I mean, in type 1, soy was 2 times more effective in increasing muscle size than whey, and vice versa for type 2. I mean, the difference was huge.
Right. Which is shocking. And so then we need to get into like, well, does muscle fiber size really impact performance at all?
Yeah.
And so those are the kinds of things you have to look at. But we really got excited about this part because it was not what not what we expected based on what we know about soy versus whey.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very interesting.
So we're going to get, like I said, we're going to get more into soy and whey in a minute.
Yeah.
But I think like the big question now, at least in my mind, when we talk about like, okay, so some soy is good, too much soy is bad. We need to define those terms.
Yes. And we will say it's somewhat loosey-goosey.
Yeah.
So we're going off with the best that we can do here.
Yeah. So the question really is like, how much soy is too much soy?
Yeah.
So in order to define that, we first need to look at like, what is a serving of soy?
Mm-hmm.
We used a definition that was put out by the American Institute of Cancer Research regarding what is one serving of soy. And they said that would be a 1/3 cup of tofu, 1 cup of soy milk, a 1/2 cup of edamame, or 1 ounce of soy nuts. So that one serving averages about 7 grams of protein and 25 milligrams of isoflavones.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that is what you'll find if you Google what's a serving of soy. You're going to find that right away. But the research kind of makes their own definitions of what a serving is. So this is I think a teachable moment for you guys that like to read research articles. Make sure that if you're just reading abstracts that you know when they say 1 serving, you need to see what they defined as 1 serving.
Yes, absolutely. So, for example, in this one particular study, it was a 2-year study, and people were given 3 servings of soy, which in this particular study was defined as 50 milligrams of isoflavone or 5 to 22 grams of soy, which is more like 2 servings as defined by the American Institute of Cancer Research. But for this study, they said 3 servings. Yep. And so during that 2-year period, researchers actually found that there was no increase in specific cancer risk markers in the body, and they had no increase in any type of cancer-related red flags, basically, over this 2-year study.
And that was with consuming what we defined as 2 servings of protein, of soy a day.
Yes. And then in another study, they assessed the risk of these same potential cancer markers, and they found that participants consuming 58 grams of soy per day, which we came out to say is about 4 servings of what we defined earlier, and found that there was actually elevated levels of this particular cancer-associated marker.
Yep, after 1 year.
After 1 year.
So basically what they're saying is if you're consuming 4 servings of soy a day, potentially after a year, you may have elevated markers that could lead to cancer.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And then there's a few other studies that showed higher servings of soy negates any type of potential benefit you get from eating soy. So high amounts of soy is not good. 2 servings, which is about 14 grams of protein from soy a day, is going to keep your risk low, but also give you the benefits of eating soy. So basically, to conclude, if you do consume soy, keep it below 50 milligrams of isoflavones, which is about 2/3 of a cup of tofu or 2 cups of soy milk, 1 cup of edamame, or 2 ounces of soy nuts. Now, keep in mind, if you're vegan or vegetarian, you should not be just eating soy as your protein source. You can get protein from all kinds of different things, including legumes or beans, except the soybean for obvious reasons, lentils or other non-soy protein powders, and also seitan. Not like Satan the devil, but seitan.
I was like, he wants me to eat Satan. Mm-hmm.
It's another higher protein source for vegans and vegetarians.
And that comes from wheat, right?
Yeah.
Isn't it made from wheat?
Wheat or wheat gluten, which is something you can't have, but
Definitely
I
not.
can eat. But even if you're not vegan or vegetarian, you really should be getting a wide variety of food anyway. And you shouldn't be relying on one source of protein or carbs or anything. Get a variety. Eat your foods.
Eat your foods. Mm-hmm. So one thing I knew that we would get questions on if we didn't get into this in this episode is soy protein supplementation, because a lot of people ask about that. I think a lot of people kind of have heard that whey protein is like top tier in terms of protein supplementation, but why? So I want to just explain that really quick, how you can actually measure the benefit of different types of protein. Mm-hmm. So protein quality is measured really in two main ways. There's the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score. That is a mouthful. The acronym is also a mouthful, PDCAAS.
And they don't make that simpler.
Basically, it just measures the completeness of amino acid content. And the max score is 1. So if it has a 1, that means that it has all of the essential amino acids. So it is a complete protein. Another way you can look at protein quality is the biological value, or BV. It'll often be called in research. And that just determines how efficiently the ingestion of that protein leads to protein synthesis. So the closer you get to 100, the better it is at leading to protein synthesis. Whey actually kind of breaks the scale. It's 104. I actually posted this on my Fiercely Fueled page like forever ago, and people got really mad at the fact that whey was like 104 when we talk about 100 being the scale. And I was like, I didn't invent this. I'm sorry. I didn't invent whey protein. I didn't invent the scale.
Sorry.
So the reason why whey protein is so popular is because it has the highest amino acid content and leads to protein synthesis the best.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's all fine and dandy. What the hell do you do if you're a vegetarian or a vegan?
Yeah, because it doesn't matter for me if whey is like the best thing in the world. I'll still not go and eat it.
Exactly. So like soy is just okay. So soy does have a complete amino acid profile, but its BV score, its biological value score, says that it doesn't lead to protein synthesis as well as whey. It rates a 74 on the scale of 100.
You know what they say though? C's get degrees.
C's get degrees. Exactly. So one thing that's really interesting though, so if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, so I'm vegan, I'm eating more than 14 grams worth of protein in soy a day. What can I do to not eat like what's considered too much? So another option that's actually better than soy, still not quite as good as whey, but better than soy in terms of being a complete protein and causing muscle protein synthesis.
The biological value.
The biological value is the rice and pea blend. So you want a 55 to 45% rice to pea blend. It has a higher biological value and is also a complete protein. So I would say from the standpoint of sports nutrition, supplementing only with plant proteins can put you at a slight disadvantage over meat-eating athletes. But if you have moral and ethical reasons for not eating animals, then that's probably more important to you than any of this. And also, you had a really good point in that you just have to pay more attention.
Yeah. It's not impossible, and you can still be a very high achieving athlete. I mean, we've had Olympians that are vegans. You can be a high achieving athlete if you pay attention to what you're eating. So you can't. Meat eaters have a little bit of an advantage in that they don't have to think about it.
You don't have to think about it. Just eat meat.
But if you are a plant-based athlete, you do have to pay a little more attention just to make sure that, I mean, you're getting enough protein, but you're getting a complete profile of essential amino acids. And that's basically it. As long as you pay attention, you can be just as good as a whey person.
A meat eater.
A meat eater.
So to recap, soy. So soy in moderate levels, so under two and under servings a day, not going to kill you. Men aren't going to grow boobs.
No boobs.
As long as women aren't high risk for cancer, it seems as though it may help reduce risk of cancer. Mm-hmm. And supplement with rice and pea protein instead of soy protein.
Yeah. And if you do every once in a while have a lot of soy in a day, it's fine.
We're talking about averages here, right? Like
Yeah.
one day is not, you're not going to,
Yeah. So like, don't
mess up
freak
your
out.
hormones and yeah.
One day is not going to kill you. It's if you do it all the time, every day for your whole life. That's when you're going to run into a problem. But it's just one day. It's what it is.
Right. I mean, same goes for like eating pie and other delicious things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're listening to this and you are plant-based, though, I mean, you can probably agree with me that it doesn't really matter what the research says. You're still not going to have whey. You're still not going to eat meat. So just pay attention to what you're eating. And for those of you who think soy is bad, it's not. That's it.
That's it.
Until next time, we will talk to you then. Bye.
Bye, ladies.